Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer. It is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today, I want to talk about the announced changes to the Atlas of Worlds that are being planned for the Delirium League, which is coming out in a couple of weeks' time. Now, I'm going to say that there's been a bit of controversy about these changes over in the Path of Exile subreddit. There's certainly a vocal section of the player base that don't like them, or at least don't like a couple of them. Now, I am not part of that vocal section of the player base, so I have no idea whether it's a majority, a minority, or whatever. But I actually quite like these changes, and I think that some of the criticisms that are being made of the changes are, well, valid, but they're valid, but I don't agree with them, and others are flat out wrong. Anyways, let's go through them, but let's start with the non-controversial stuff first. So, the first thing that's talked about in these changes is determinism. Currently, there's a degree of randomness in getting Conqueror encounters. So the way that it currently works is that you need to be eligible to encounter a Conqueror. So that means that you need to be running a map in an octant of the Atlas that is not currently influenced by any of the Conquerors. So for instance, on this little section of the Atlas that you see here, the green zone here so that's Turn's End. That is currently influenced by Alhesman the Hunter. So if you started running a map there, you would not be eligible to spawn a new Conqueror because Alhesman's there. But if you were to run in Haywire Hamlet, at the moment, the area is currently not influenced by anyone, as you can tell by just having the natural Atlas tile set colouring. So for that reason, you start running maps in Haywire. There is another very well hidden factor as to whether or not you're eligible to find a Conqueror there. And this is the thing that I think most needed to change and hasn't been announced in these changes. What you need to do is mouse over the Haywire Hamlet container on the Atlas of Worlds and have a look and see what level the Haywire Hamlet octant needs to be in order for a Conqueror to spawn there. So depending upon your current progress through collecting the Watchstones, you might get a message when you mouse over Haywire saying, red already obtained, so that means you've already beat Baron in Haywire Hamlet. Green, which is Alhesman, you can only encounter him when the area is level 2 or higher. Level 2 means two Watchstones currently socketed in there. Blue might say that you can only fight Veritania when you've got 3, so level 3. And yellow might say you can only fight Drox when the area is level 1. This information is hidden and is one of the sources, I think, of a lot of confusion when it comes to getting your Atlas going. Anyways, those things should be changed. But when you are eligible, the current behaviour is that if you run any map in Haywire Hamlet, one of the Conquerors you're eligible to fight at random will come into your map and taunt you. This taunt will involve them saying something to you, and then they'll spawn a whole bunch of their monsters to attack you in that zone. The next map that you start, you'll be taunted again. The next map, you'll be taunted again. And that's the end of the cycle. You'll have 3 taunts, and then you'll be eligible to visit that Conqueror's watchtower. That's the process until you've collected a certain number of Watchstones, which I believe is 16, but I can't verify that because it's quite some time since I leveled a new character. So, for that reason, you'll then, after that point, so you'll always be fighting Conquerors at that point. After that, the Conquerors will only turn up 1 in 3 times. Now, this 1 in 3 is random. And if there's one thing that Path of Exile players don't understand generally, it's how randomness works and just how bad unlucky streaks can get. So, if it's 1 in 3 for Veritania to taunt you in a particular octant, let's say that Haywire Hamlet was influenced by Veritania at this point. So it was, you had that familiar blue influence of Veritania. Every individual map that you opened, assuming that you've got 16 Watchstones or more, you'll have a 1 in 3 chance for Veritania to taunt you. But your probability of running 5 maps and not seeing Veritania at all in those 5 maps is 32 in 243, which is a little bit more than 1 in 8. Now, if you think 1 in 8 is actually not all that low a probability, what about your probability of running 10 maps and not encountering Veritania? It's still a couple of percent. That's still going to happen a reasonable amount of times, that you will not encounter Veritania even once in 10 maps. Now, one of the things that can make this quite demoralizing for more casual players in Path of Exile is that for veteran players, this doesn't really matter. You've got a big map pool behind you because of the amount of oversustain that you get in the current Atlas of Worlds. You've got a huge map pool behind you. You've got no shortage of new maps in the Haywark Hamlet area, so you can just keep going at it. You're also pretty damn fast at running those maps. That 10 maps has probably only taken you 25 minutes, and you've gone, oh, that's a bit strange, I haven't had Veritania once. Oh well, let's run another 10 and we're pretty sure we're going to get her. But for more casual players, that 10 maps might actually represent 2 40-minute play sessions. And that might be a whole week's play, and they've not seen Veritania once. Then, perhaps the next week, they do get Veritania over 3 times. Then they go to a Citadel, and they get their ass kicked. And suddenly, that feels like a 2-week setback. That's made a lot worse by the fact that the first week, their 10 maps didn't get Veritania once. So for that reason, I think this is a good change. It's a change that benefits the more casual players by smoothing out the effect of that luck, while having very little impact on veterans. Now, the way that it's actually going to work is that taunts will occur on your 1st, 3rd, and 5th maps early on in progression. Once you get a few Watchstones behind you, they'll appear 1st, 4th, and 7th maps, and once you've got a lot of Watchstones behind you, 1st, 5th, and 9th. I think it's actually going to take a little bit longer to get to your first Cyrus encounter on a fresh league, which I don't think is a bad thing, given that pretty much most people that get to Cyrus, unless you know the fight very, 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 very well, the first time you get to Cyrus, you're not prepared for that fight. It's miles harder than anything you've encountered at that point in the Atlas. So I don't think it's a problem if the first Cyrus fight takes a little bit longer to get up to, and then the subsequent ones will still take exactly the same amount of time. A Cyrus spawn currently is about 36 maps on average, plus the four Conqueror Citadels. Now it will always be 36 plus 4. So every 40 maps you'll get a Conqueror, rather than it being sometimes you'll run 27, sometimes you'll run 39, sometimes you'll run 53. So, unlucky streaks going away, lucky streaks also going away, but I think the net effect will be positive. The other change that's happening is that you will know in advance when you're going to be taunted. And you will know this when you select what map to use. So if you're playing a really powerful character, let's say that you've got your top meta Baron zombie build, you feel like you can smash anything. And you've got here that Baron is going to be taunting you in the map. Well, don't just run a normal map. Grab the hardest rare map that you've rolled and stick a couple of Scarabs in with it. You know that you're going to have Baron's monsters in there as well, and so all of them will get the benefits of any loot multiplier Scarabs that you happen to use. So that's something that more veteran players can use to their advantage. On the flip side, if you're struggling a bit with the encounters, you've also got the flexibility to say, well, I know that Baron's going to taunt me on the 3rd map, so I'm going to use the easiest of the maps that I've rolled, that 3rd one. Then on the 4th one, when there's no Baronite Thaumaturges to worry about, then on that map, I will use the nasty looking 6 mod rare that I've got here. And then for the 5th one, I'll go for an easy map again. So more flexibility, I think this is going to generally be a good set of changes. Secondly, the Sextant recipe is back. So you'll be able to vendor 3 simple Sextants to get a Prime Sextant, 3 Prime Sextants to get an Awakened Sextant. This is a pretty small change, one that will have a few economic impacts. The main one will be that you will no longer see stupidly cheap simple Sextants anymore. If they do get stupidly cheap, then players who are into market arbitrage will simply buy them up, vendor them up into Prime or Awakened Sextants, depending on how the market settles out, and resell them. And given that that is a very non-labor intensive process, it will happen very quickly and will keep the price of, it will set a hard floor on the price of simple Sextants that hasn't existed this league. Now, that's going to have a couple of effects. Firstly, you're not just going to be able to use simple Sextants totally frivolously like we can now. you're going to want to at least put a little bit of thought into it. But secondly, you'll have more access to Prime and Awakened Sextants to chase for some of the higher Sextant tier roles. So overall, I think this is probably a pretty good change, but it's going to have a pretty small impact on play, I think. That said, let's see how it goes. Next up, we have the Atlas Reshuffle. Now, let's start getting a little bit controversial, shall we? So, some of the big changes that were made in 3.8, sorry, between 3.8 and 3.9, seemed designed to smash the old meta of shaped Atlas strategies that revolved around one or two ideal tileset maps. So for the entirety of the Atlas of Worlds era, so that's the period from when the shape was introduced until when the Elder was introduced, and the entirety of the War for the Atlas era, which is the time between the Elder being introduced and then Uber Elder the next league, all the way through to the Conquerors of the Atlas expansion. Shaped Atlas strategies were objectively better on every relevant metric than any other Atlas strategy. They gave more XP per hour, they gave more loot per hour, and in some leagues this went to absolute extremes, like in the Legion League, where basically the progression for your Atlas was, early on, do Glacier. When your character's powerful enough, upgrade from Glacier to Shaped Glacier. When your character is still more powerful, upgrade from Shaped Glacier to Elder Glacier. No other map in the game could compete. That's the most extreme example that we have, and if you go back to the Legacy League, which is a long time ago now, probably almost 3 years ago, gee. If you go back to the Legacy League, it was Shaped Strand, was the absolute best map. And these maps were so much better than anything else, so much better, that essentially, even if you found this playstyle not to be fun, you felt powerfully compelled into changing away from what you find a more fun playstyle of just running all the different tile sets, or all the different tile sets, maybe minus a couple of specific ones that you actively disliked. You felt compelled to go away from what was fun and go towards what was powerful. Now, not everyone did that, and my experience was that some leagues I went with a shaped approach. Those leagues I burnt out quickly and got bored and quit playing for the league much earlier. Other leagues I stayed with some sort of varied approach, suffered the penalty in terms of getting less loot, less character power, less XP, but had more fun with it. And this trade-off between fun and progression power was something that was always something I felt was a fundamental flaw in the whole Atlas of Worlds system. Now, of course, on the other hand, there are people who are probably listening to this and saying, what is this idiot saying? Strand was the most fun map ever around. It's just objectively more fun than running a map like Cells, or even a middle tier map like what's a good example of a middle tier map compared to Strand would be something like Leyline. So they're thinking, what the hell is this idiot saying? I had much more fun whenever I ran a shaped Atlas. It was just the best way to play the game. And yeah, that's fine. That's a valid opinion. The problem was that I felt compelled by the loot incentives of the game to go for this strategy because it was just so much better than anything else. I couldn't compete, particularly in Legion. I mean, I quit Legion League, not completely quit, but mostly quit it pretty early on because I realized that the only way that I could trade for a headhunter in that league, which was my original plan, but when I first saw what the league was about, I thought, oh yeah, I'll try and get myself an early headhunter, and then I'll do goofy stuff with it. And then I realized that the people who were running the Shaped and Elder Glacier strategies were just outbidding me, because there was a limited supply of headhunters in the economy, and those people were just willing to pay so much more than I was able to farm without doing an unhealthy amount of grinding. And so I thought, well, I'm going to give up on that league goal. And when you're giving up on a league goal, you then think, do I really want to do everything else in this league? And that was how that played out for me in Legion. Anyway, so with all of that in mind, there's a few changes that are being made to the Atlas where a couple of tiers are being changed around but they're saying it's pretty minor. I am expecting that that the net effect of these will be to break the currently existing strategies by which players can get around. But like, there's a couple of loopholes, even in some cases borderline exploits in the meta at the moment, where players can set up a second account that only does certain maps in order to ensure that only certain maps can drop. Now, I don't know exactly what's going to happen here, but I think there'll probably be some changes to make targeted breaks on those strategies. So this might mean, for instance, Burial Chambers, which is a tier 6 on one Watchstone, when it's at a level 1, so one Watchstone, and it's the only tier 6 map in that Octant, I believe. It wouldn't surprise me if it's put adjacent to another tier 6 map, which then means that the tier 6 Burial Chambers strategy of farming only Burial Chambers will no longer work, or at least the main one won't. I don't know how they'll handle multiple accounts. That'll have to be something that I don't think that's something that will be announced, because it's generally they tend to stealth nerf things that are that broken. So anyways, that's what I'm assuming that they mean by this sort of cryptic, no details provided Atlas reshuffle section. I'm all for this. I feel that single map strategies are so much more powerful that the only way to really balance them is by going with absolutely smashing nerfs like we saw to Strand after Legacy League. Now, for anyone that played during Legacy League, you'll remember how overpowered Strand was at the time. Even if you thought that was a good thing for the game, I think people will agree that it was insane. The way that the game worked prior to Legacy was that maps were given a certain number of monster packs, and this was the same on all map tile sets. So, if you're running Strand, those would be in predictable locations over a fairly short distance, and so it would be very quick to go through that map and kill all the monsters. On the flip side, if you're running a more clunky tile set like Torture Chamber, there would be the same amount of monsters as there would be in a Strand, but they would be in all sorts of shitty little dead ends. And so the best way to play in that league was to run Strand and to Sextant it up and use all sorts of no longer existent Sextant blocking strategies to make your Sextants more efficient, and then run, I think it was tier 11 shaped Strands over and 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 over again. So that was the old school. Then they came along with a nerf where they took the number of monsters in Strand down a bit of a peg. Not just a peg. Like, even I think that nerf was a little bit too much. I think it's one of the best changes that the game has made in terms of net fun, but I also think it was probably too much. And I think that that's the sort of change that would be needed. If you wanted to balance around the options of having single map strategies, you would need to quite severely penalise them in terms of loot and XP, to the point that you're going to end up annoying the people that like those strategies anyway. I think it's better just to break them. And I think that we can look at the Steam concurrent users chart information and the trend for this league and get a bit of a sense that this, whilst there's certainly people that don't like this change, it has also been undeniably the case that 3.9 has been well received, more so than most previous leagues. And I think a big part of that is that the whole burnout associated with single map strategies is gone. So, Awakening level and bonus. Before I talk about this change, because I think there's a significant drop to one type of map sustain here, I want to differentiate between two different types of map sustain in the game. The first one is breaking out of a tier. So this is that part, imagine in a league, at the start of a league, you've been running tier 8 and tier 9 maps mostly, and you want to amass a number of tier 10 maps so that you can break out of tiers 8 and 9 and start running tier 10s. So depending on how you do it, you might collect 6, 7, 8 tier 10 maps and then think, okay, I've now got enough to break out. And maybe you'll be successful, maybe you'll be unsuccessful, you'll run out of your tier 10 maps, you'll get a couple of tier 11s from them, and you'll end up falling back to tier 9s. This is breaking out of a tier. It's where you're trying to go from having no maps in a tier, but you've got maps of the tier below, into having lots of maps of the higher tier. This is a different concept to map sustain. Map sustain is where you're comfortably at endgame and you've got a decent pool of maps and you're wanting to see that map pool not decrease over time. It is much easier to sustain maps than it is to break out of tiers. And I think that most of the complaints that people have had in the past about map sustain have actually been about the difficulty of breaking out of tiers. There's a number of tricks that allow you to do this really effectively. Zana's missions and Elva's missions are both really good at breaking you out of a tier. Nico's can be as well, but that takes a bit more setup. But generally speaking, breaking out of a tier is always harder than sustaining. So, what the changes to the Awakening bonus objectives do is they decrease map sustain at the very top end, but they actually slightly increase your map breakout capability. I think that both of these changes are good for the game. So, let's get ready to be controversial again. So what's going on? The changes to the Awakening level mean that it kicks in a bit, that the bonus of the Awakening level kicks in a bit earlier. So this means that you'll start getting adjacent maps dropping earlier on. So let's say that you're at the point in progression where you've got 12 Watchstones and you're running mostly tier 9 maps, but you've got a few tier 11s and 12s done, maybe you've got a couple of them in your stash, but you're mostly running tier 8 and 9 maps. At this point, currently, in the current Atlas, so 3.9 Atlas, you'll have an Awakening level of 0, because most likely you don't have any Octants raised to level 4. You'll have your Octants raised to 2 and 3, the ones that you're focusing on. So for that reason, you're not getting any benefit at all from the Awakening bonus. But with 12 Watchstones socketed, you'll now actually have an Awakening bonus of 3, which means that you'll start getting some adjacent maps dropping, you'll start getting some of your unique items dropping as well. You'll also get Atlas bases, but that's less impactful. So, this is going to be a factor that will help you break out. It's only a small percentage, but small percentages are everything when it comes to maps. There is a very good reason that if you're playing in a casino and you've got a strategy that wins 99.5% of your money back from the house, you become one of their good customers. If you've got a strategy that wins 101% of your money back from the house, you will very quickly find yourself blacklisted from that casino. So small edges matter a lot here. And this Awakening level change is going to increase the small edges when you need them most, but the Awakening bonus objectives is going to severely decrease map sustain when you get to the top tier. The double dip on map sustain is going away. You'll no longer be able to get 1.55 extra tiers on maps from your Atlas bonus and then a further 0.77 or so from the Awakening bonus objective. It will now cap at that 1.55. Now, what happens in the current league is that once you get established in tier 14 and 16 maps, the Awakening bonus objective and the Atlas bonus together combine to give you so much of a boost in the maps that are dropping for you that you end up just absolutely flooded with maps. I am not kidding when I say that if you take 100 maps, tier 14 plus, scour them all, and then go and run them all, and keep track of the number of map drops that you get, you need to kill the bosses and kill sort of most of the map. You don't need to kill every single monster on it, but try to go for less than 50 remaining in each of them. If you do this, at the end of that experiment, you'll have more than 100 tier 14 to 16 maps. And this, I think, is a real problem because it disincentivizes running hard maps. It also means that the maps that you're looting are not really worth anything because you're just so flooded with them. Maps in previous leagues have been treasure. In this league, they're just a little bit of busy work to do. Now, losing this extra 0.77 tiers on your maps when you've got a fully established Atlas is going to slightly cramp the amount of over sustain you get. What I think it's going to mean is that the current amount of, well, I think it's going to kill the scour and go strategy, but it will still be possible to transmute and go on top tier maps, so tier 14 to 16 maps. It will still be possible just to transmute a map, maybe augment it as well, and run it as is. And when I say possible, I mean that you will expect that on average, if you run 100 of these maps, you'll probably end up with 130 maps back. But scouring them, you'll no longer end up with 115 like I did. You can expect that you might get 90 back or 80 back instead. If you elk your maps, you'll still massively oversustain. Massively oversustain over the long run. So, these changes don't have any detrimental effect to your sustain when maps are actually tight, which is breaking into high yellow and low red tier maps, but they'll have a massive impact on reducing the oversupply of maps in the economy. Now, a last quick little aside that I want to make on oversupply in general in Path of Exile. If you've played for many leagues, you might remember when Regal Orbs were worth something. Regal Orbs being one of the rarer currency orbs that drop from monsters. And you have to drop quite a way down to find this information because they're so worthless in the Metamorph League. But here is a price trajectory for Regal Orbs across the whole Metamorph League. As always, they start pretty high, and then they collapse quickly. But the collapse has just kept going on and on and on and on. And actually, there's sort of a little bit of a spike after I put out a video on how you can turn Regal Orbs into Scouring Orbs with a little bit of work. And that seemed to have driven a little bit of demand over the next few days. But then they've just gone back down. Now, Regal Orbs at their bottom were 0.08 Chaos, less than the Chromatic Orb, and so low that most endgame-oriented players remove them from their loot filters. This is a totally new behavior in the Metamorph League. And the reason for it is that Metamorph encounters drop so damn many Regal Orbs that it ends up that they just totally overwhelm, the supply of them overwhelms the demand. And this has not caused players to end up with more loot. Back a few leagues ago, you'd get one Regal Orb roughly every 15 maps or so, and then when you went to sell it, you'd get a Chaos for it, Chaos and a half sometimes. And, that's a small income. Maybe a chaos every 10 maps, every 12 maps or so on average. But it was meaningful. Now, yeah, you're probably getting a Regal Orb every map, but you're not picking them up because they're so worthless that they're not on your loot filter. And so as a result, you've gone from getting that Chaos every 10 maps or so to getting nothing in its place. That's what happens when things get oversupplied. Now, maps have not hit that point in this league. This is the tier 14 maps. Tier 14s, for some weird reasons, are actually more expensive than 16s in this league. That's because the way that the Atlas bonus is structured, you are more likely to get a tier 16 map than anything else when you're running a 16 yourself. If you're running a 15, you'll get a balance of 15s and 16s, but very few 14s. And it's only really if you're running a 14 that you'll see 14s come back, and you'll also get quite a few 15s from them. So with all of that in mind, 14s have been the most expensive tier this league, and they've been mostly in the 5 Chaos range, with quite a few of them lower. So unpopular tile sets go down as low as 3 or 4 Chaos, and the rest at 5. But tier 16 maps, and I've just got to make sure that we don't consider the top 4 because those are oddballs. Tier 16 maps are around the 5 Chaos mark as well, even Violet Temple, which is interesting. That was a lot more expensive early in the league. Now, this is the lowest prices for maps in any league, including Harbinger. Harbinger was the first real map over sustain league that we ever had. The only one that was as extreme as this one. And whilst maps haven't quite gone the way that Regal Orbs have, I could see this happening. If the next league were to repeat the Atlas as it currently is, and to repeat the level of over-sustain that there is, I think that we might actually see maps following this trajectory. Now, the problem with that is that actually one of the major incentives for running high-tier maps is that you get high-tier maps back. They're a big part of the loot that you get when you're running a high-tier, so when you're running a tier 15, a big part of the loot historically was the tier 16 maps that you might drop in there. In fact, If you ran 100 tier 15 maps in, say, Incursion League, which was the last league in which map scarcity was still a thing, a big part of your loot, much more value, you'd get much more value in tier 16 drops than you would from, say, Exalted Orbs, or Chaos Orbs, or Alchemy Orbs. You would get much more value out of the upgrade maps that you'd get occasionally. So, with that in mind, I think that a nerf to map over sustain when you're already established is a positive thing for the game, as well as that the earlier access to the awakening level is a positive as well. Lastly, a couple of other points that I want to make. The X% increased effect of modifiers on non-unique maps. Firstly, this is moving, and you're going to get it a bit later than you do now. So at the moment, you get your X% bonus to the effect of modifiers on non-unique maps when you start having level 4 sections on your atlas. That's going to be changing to be part of the awakening bonus objective, which is the bonus for doing a map, say at tier, a map on its tier 14 to 16 version at a minimum awakening level. So maybe it's a minimum awakening level of 3. This means you'll get this increase in the magnitude of mods a bit later than you do now. Now, to give a bit of a sense of the numbers behind this increased magnitude of mods stat, if you are running a map that has 21% pack size and 72% quantity, and you've got the maximum awakening level at the moment, so 24% increased numerical effect of mods on maps, the 21% pack size increases to 25%, the 72% quantity increases to 89%, and the loot that you get from the map goes from 2.0812 times that of a scoured map up to 2.3625. So this is about a 13.5% more multiplier on your loot, and it's about a 3.3% more multiplier on the amount of XP that you get from the map. That's because it goes from 121% of base pack size up to 125% of base pack size. So, these changes have attracted a little bit of opposition on Reddit because players are being concerned that their second characters won't be able to turn off this bonus. Here I want to be contrarian and say I don't think this is going to be a problem. That's because you can simply less aggressively roll maps. If you've got a second character that you're leveling up that you feel is just a little bit underpowered to face some of the hardest things that your atlas, with its completely awakening bonus, can throw at them, then that's fine. You can simply run maps instead of alchemy orbing maps. You can transmute, augment, and then regal. That'll give you a 3-mod map, which is actually quite competitive with a 4-mod map that has been, so a 3-mod map with 24% increased numerical effect of modifiers will be comparable in both difficulty and rewards to a 4-mod map that does not have that stat on it. So, the last thing that I want to point out is that Atlas Mission Replenish is being loosely tied to the Awakening bonus. This won't matter much. By the time that you get late enough in progression that you have a metric fuckton of your Atlas completed, you will be swimming in master missions. The only people that will be affected by this in any meaningful way at all will be people that want to focus their entire gameplay around doing one specific master a lot. So, for instance, if you're someone that is doing Einhard rotations day in, day out, then this will be a slight buff for you, although you will need to focus on getting your Awakening bonus either complete or almost complete as early as possible. Anyways, that gives a bit of a summary of the changes. All in all, I'm pretty positive on these changes. I hope they stay largely as they are. I think that the nerf to map over sustain is a good thing for the game. The buffs to your ability to break out of early tiers is also a very good thing for the game. And that the removal of randomness from the Conqueror's content, whilst it won't affect me very much, I think it will be a positive for more casual endgame players, whilst not being a negative for someone like myself at all. If you've got any comments or feedback though, definitely fire away below. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it there. I hope you have a good one.